The question is that this House... Sorry.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. The question is this House do now adjourn. As many of that have been to say aye.
Aye.
The contrary, no. I call David Davis.
Sir Edward, thank you for calling me. I will hesitate just a second as the chamber clears my normal popularity. 3 years ago, Sir Edward, on the 16th of March 2021, I presented to this House the implications of the unlawful Scottish Government investigation and contrived criminal charges against Alex Salmond. I recommended empowering the Scottish Parliament to investigate as the Scottish court found the government acted illegally and engaged in a process tainted by bias against Mr Salmond. Regrettably, the investigative committee appointed by Holyrood was limited in its powers of investigation, operated without the protection of privilege, and was thwarted at every turn by the delay, obfuscation and even threats from the Scottish Government and institutions of state. 3 years on, that failure in democratic accountability has not been addressed. The investigatory powers of the Scottish Parliament could have been strengthened. Decisions about whether and who to prosecute could have been made entirely independent of ministers of the Scottish Government. Neither of these things have happened, forcing me to raise this matter again. Mr Salmond has been found innocent. He previously succeeded in Scotland's highest civil court in establishing the illegality of Scottish Government actions. He is currently suing the Scottish Government in a civil action. This has been insisted as some of those involved in constructing the case against Mr Salmond are now themselves under police investigation. I will therefore focus today on those wider failings in this sorry case and what those raise for the state of the rule of law in Scotland. In 2017, the senior Scottish Government figures set up a procedure for dealing with sexual harassment allegations that effectively targeted Alex Salmond. I believe that at an early stage this was done with the knowledge of Nicola Sturgeon's team and potentially with their encouragement. The procedure applied retrospectively to former ministers, Mr Salmond no longer being a minister, but excluded civil servants. Sue Gray, then Head of Propriety and Ethics at the Cabinet Office, expressed discomfort with the procedure. Despite this, the Scottish Government proceeded. An investigating officer was appointed. They would have had no prior contact with complainants. Yet the officer appointed, Judith McKinnon, had in fact had extensive prior contact with the complainants. It has now also emerged the person deciding the case, former Permanent Secretary Leslie Evans, also met with complainants during the process. That information was withheld from the Court of Session in one of the many breaches of the Scottish governmental duty of candour in this case. Mr Salmond was informed of the complaints against him in March 2018, all were denied, and in April 2018 his legal team immediately raised concerns about the fairness and legality of the new procedure, as well as concerns over Mr Salmond's access to witnesses and documents. He offered mediation and arbitration to bring the illegality of the process into focus. It was repeatedly rejected. Messages between two civil servants in early February 2018 show how Liz Lloyd, Sturgeon's Chief of Staff, was directly interfering in discussions with complainers ahead of their complaints being made. Her role, acting, we must assume, with the knowledge of her boss, was central to these events. Furthermore, evidence to the Holyrood inquiry from Mr Salmond's former Chief of Staff, Jeff Aberdeen, stated that Liz Lloyd in early March 2018 informed him, and I quote, "There were two individual complainers." This assertion is supported by 3 other witnesses. This directly contradicts her claim that she first became aware of the allegations in April 2018. Yet it's a claim she doubtless felt compelled to make in order not to contradict Nicola Sturgeon's position already given to the Scottish Parliament. Sturgeon misleading the Scottish Parliament would of course have led to her resignation. This same untruth was repeated on behalf of the Scottish Government during the judicial review. It's the position of Mr Salmond's legal team that neither Lloyd nor Sturgeon were telling the truth. Now, very quickly after my previous debate on these matters, Scottish police visited me, asking where I got all this information. They got a nice cup of tea and a biscuit. Strangely, though, they had no interest whatsoever in what appears to be the prima facie evidence of perjury by those holding high office. And let me say clearly today, these matters now obviously require to be properly investigated by the police. In August 2018, ignoring the evident impropriety of the process, Leslie Evans, the Permanent Secretary, decided some complaints against Salmon were well founded. Salmon was told of Evans' decision and that a press release was to be issued at 5 p.m. Salmon's legal team was about to lodge a judicial review of the whole procedure, so urgently sought and received written assurances that no press release would be issued. Despite these assurances, only hours later the Daily Record published news of the allegations. Part of the decision report had been unlawfully leaked. Other than Mr. Salmon, only the Scottish Government had that report. However, I have personally met with a witness who has made a statement that he was told by the then political editor of the Daily Record that the story was in fact leaked to them by Liz Lloyd. The House should also know that the ICO prosecutor investigating this leak concluded, "I have sympathy with the hypothesis the leak came from an employee of the Scottish Government." The Scottish Government, of course, fought the judicial review at huge cost, despite their own legal advisers telling them in no uncertain terms that they would fail. They were warned, and I quote, "It makes little sense to continue to defend the indefensible," and that the least worst option was to concede the case. Eventually, both the Scottish Government's external counsel told the government they were in an untenable position and were suffering extreme professional embarrassment because of government failings. They were also warned, and this is important, that civil servants were deliberately misleading both them and the court. Despite these repeated warnings, the government only conceded a judicial review after their external counsel threatened resignation. In January 2019, the Court of Session found the Scottish Government had acted unlawfully and that their actions and processes were procedurally unfair and tainted by apparent bias. Now, commentators often describe the investigation as botched. It was that and more. It was illegal, pure and simple. Yet no one has been held accountable, and millions of pounds of taxpayers' money has wasted. But it's perhaps unsurprising when you look at the attitude of those at the top of the Scottish Civil Service. The same day Salmon won his case, Leslie Evans, the Permanent Secretary, sent a message to a colleague saying, "The battle was lost but not the war." Hardly the language of an impartial senior civil servant. Senior figures at the top of the Scottish Government appear to have colluded to ensure that Salmon was reported to the Police Scotland. There is evidence of contact between figures in the Scottish Government and officers of the Scottish National Party, and WhatsApp messages reveal Liz Lloyd was convening a, quote, Council of War, unquote, WhatsApp group. The whistleblower then revealed communications from Sue Riddick, then SNP's Chief Operating Officer, that in their words points to collusion, perjury, up to criminal conspiracy. In the communication, she, along with the then Chief Executive of the SNP, Peter Morrell, encouraged and coached complainants into reporting Salmon to the police. Appearing at the Holyrood inquiry in December 2020, Morrell was asked whether he was part of this so-called Council of War WhatsApp group. Morrell denied even using WhatsApp. Yet it then emerged he did have WhatsApp and it had been used within weeks of the evidence session. Yet another clear lie. The House may now wonder what the Scottish Government investigation had to do with the Scottish Nationalist Party in the first place. The answer is provided by Anne Harvey, a qualified lawyer who was then senior official for the SNP in this House, who wisely refused to have anything to do with what she characterised as a witch hunt. I recommend colleagues read again my debate from the 16th of March 2021, since in that debate I outlined the actions of senior officers of the SNP, Peter Morrell, Sue Riddick, their compliance officer Ian McCann, whose interference in an ongoing police inquiry represented nothing less than an attempt to pervert the course of justice. The Police Scotland investigation was triggered by Leslie Evans, who sent the results of its internal inquiry to the Crown Agent, Mr David Harvey. The Crown Agent is responsible for overseeing all prosecutions in Scotland. Despite the subsequent police inquiry and court case, Salmond was acquitted on all charges by a majority female jury in front of a female judge. As a result of the Scottish Government's unlawful handling of the allegations, the Scottish Parliament established a committee to examine how the First Minister, Scottish Government officials and special advisers dealt with the complaints against Salmond. Even before the committee's report was published, the convener said that the committee was being undermined by the delay, prevarication and obfuscation on the part of the SNP government. When published, the report was damning. It reads, and I quote, "Many documents were in our view insufficient to provide a complete picture of events being considered by the committee, and again that has hampered the committee's work. There would be uproar if a committee of this House was impeded in such a manner. But the Scottish Government's attempts to thwart the parliamentary inquiry did not stop there. It ignored 2 votes in the Scottish Parliament and waited until the very last minute to release legal advice it had received upon judicial review. And that advice was only released the day before Sturgeon would give evidence, after the opposition threatened a no-confidence motion against the current First Minister, John Swinney. Even then, when released, it was not the full advice. Crucial parts were only made available after Sturgeon had appeared. Additionally, the Crown Office was threatening MSPs with prosecution due to the proceedings of the committee. Threats such as that will be treated in Westminster as a contempt of Parliament. At the instigation of the Crown Office, Police Scotland opened an investigation after WhatsApp messages given to the inquiry were made public. These messages showed Peter Murrell calling for pressure to be put on the police to investigate Salmond. And throughout this sorry business, the Crown Office have been enthusiastic in their pursuit of those who published evidence in this case. A journalist has been jailed. Another journalist was prosecuted in a case completely dismissed by the Sheriff's Court. The Crown Office engaged in a legal battle with the Spectator to stop publication of evidence to the Parliamentary Committee. And what is most troubling at the time is that the line manager of David Hardy, the Crown Agent, who oversees the prosecutions in Scotland, was Leslie Evans, the Scottish Government's Permanent Secretary, of which I've already spoken. And Mr Harvey's legal boss was the former Lord Advocate, James Wolfe, who himself was advising the Scottish Government not to concede the judicial review against that same Scottish Government. This setup is fundamentally wrong, and I'll outline just one example of why. On the 2nd of March 2021, Mr Harvey, the Crown Agent, was at pains to tell Parliamentary Committee, under oath, that he had never discussed the case with his line manager, Leslie Evans. Now, that may be true. However, what I can now tell the House is that documents show Mr Harvey had in fact discussed the matter with Leslie Evans' private secretary, a representative on earth, if you like, in the days before he became involved in the case. It's fundamentally unsatisfactory that the then Crown Agent, the senior official in the administration of justice in Scotland, cannot be relied upon to tell a parliamentary committee the whole truth. I find it even more unsatisfactory when the Crown Office shows no interest in investigating these great matters. In giving evidence to the inquiry, Nicola Sturgeon repeatedly failed to answer questions because she could not recall. In the end, the committee found, by a vote of 5-4, that Nicola Sturgeon had given an inaccurate account of her knowledge of the allegations. In one of its clearest findings, the Parliamentary Committee found unanimously that Leslie Evans was personally as well as corporately responsible for failings that have cost the Scottish taxpayer millions of pounds and led to the humiliation of the Scottish Government in the highest civil court in Scotland due to their unlawful behaviour. Has there been any penalty for these failings? Of course not. Instead, Miss Evans' contract was extended along with her pension. The damage she's caused, both by her action and inaction, has been left totally unaccounted for. Now, something must be done to prevent these failures of accountability in public service in future, and I hope that the duty of candour legislation in the King's Speech means that something finally will be done. Alongside the Holyrood inquiry, Lawyer James Hamilton was asked to look at whether Nicola Sturgeon breached the ministerial code during this affair. And once Mr Hamilton concluded that Sturgeon did not breach the code, his report was so heavily redacted by the Scottish Government that he, in a highly unusual move, insisted on publication of a rather stark note alongside it. Hamilton said such redactions, and I quote, presents an incomplete and even at times misleading version of what happened. And I've heard evidence that special advisers, not lawyers, special advisers appointed by Nicola Sturgeon have been directly involved in the redactions of Mr Hamilton's report. I pursued this point with the current Permanent Secretary, but I've not received a satisfactory reply, in fact. To obtain further information on the Hamilton report, a Freedom of Information request was made to the Scottish Government. The Scottish Government refused to publish the requested information, claiming they did not hold it, despite it being their report. The Information Commissioner rubbished that claim and ordered it be published. The Scottish Government attempted to appeal that decision. I attended, myself, the appeal last year in Edinburgh and noted the government case as being not just summarily dismissed, but dismissed in a completely humiliating manner. I brought a number of cases against governments. I've never seen quite such a outright humiliating dismissal. Despite these losses, the Scottish Government has still failed to publish the information requested and now opposes the publication on other grounds. Now, when I first brought these matters to the attention of this House, Nicola Sturgeon was still First Minister in all of her unchallengeable pomp. She's not anymore. We all know what's happened to her and the top management of the SNP since, and I cannot and will not go into all that now. But that's an important backdrop to this sorry saga. My purpose today has been to concentrate on matters of fundamental principle so we can ensure that these unlawful and unshameful events cannot be repeated. These events occurred under the devolution settlement secured under the Scotland Act 1998. The Holyrood Parliamentary Committee suffered as it did not have adequate power to hold the Scottish Government to account, allowing it to be frustrated by the Government and threatened by the Crown Office. It is frankly not appropriate for the Lord Advocate to be both a public prosecutor and the Government's legal adviser. Now, I put forward that position 3 years ago in my debate on the 16th of March 2021 and was supported by the former member for Edinburgh South West, Joanna Cherry. And Ms Cherry suggested or proposed in the private members' legislation, which had cross-party support, some proposals here. Now, despite the case being conceded in principle by the Scottish Government, no legislative action has followed. No action. There is also concern about how SNP's leadership exerted influence over the rule of law in Scotland, in the Scottish Parliament, the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, the courts, the police and the media. Nicola Sturgeon is no longer First Minister, but her successors have continued to suppress the truth about their party's disgraceful attempts to destroy Alex Salmond. In so doing, they have continued to deny him proper redress. But this is more than about Alex Salmond. To ensure this never happens again, we must review the consequences for civil servants found to have acted improperly by parliamentary committees. We must strengthen the investigative powers and legal protections offered members of the Scottish Parliament. And we must immediately separate the powers of Scottish law officers from their roles in administering criminal justice and providing advice to the Scottish Government. It is time, Sir Edward, to invoke the famous phrase often invoked for England but just as pertinent in Scotland, fiat justitia, let justice be done. And before I sit down on what is otherwise an incredibly serious debate, can I apologise to the Minister on the front bench, because it was my actions today that forced her to do her maiden at such short notice, but if I may say so, she carried that off brilliantly and deserves double points for it.
Yeah.
Minister.
Yeah.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I'd like to begin by thanking the Right Honourable Member for his warm welcome to the Chamber and indeed for the work that we've done together in the past on promoting the values of humanitarianism. And he will know that this is not only my first day speaking at this dispatch box, but that my maiden speech just a short while ago was my very first contribution of any kind in this House. And with nearly 4 decades of dedicated service in this place, I hope he may still recall the trepidation of standing here to speak for the first time. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, turning to the subject matter of the debate, I would like to begin with a celebration of the Scotland Act 1998. It is 25 years since Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II opened the Scottish Parliament, and the late and much missed Donald Dewar was sworn in as First Minister. Donald Dewar, the father of devolution, described the Scottish Parliament as not an end but a means to greater ends, namely greater social justice in Scotland. That is the driving imperative which guides Labour still, which is why ensuring support for both the Union and devolved institutions should be seen as a precondition for, and not the sum total of, this government's ambitions. In the quarter century since the establishment of the Scottish Parliament, we have seen a deepening of devolution through the 2012 and 2016 Scotland Acts. And crucially, of course, these reforms were based on cross-party consensus in Scotland. I'm immensely proud that I will now have a role in the ongoing success of that Act as it continues to deliver for people in Scotland. Mr Deputy Speaker, it is of course right that we continue to hear views from all sides on how constitutional framework should evolve. However, I believe that it is in the relationships and collaboration that we will together drive progress and deliver for the people that we were all sent here to serve. As my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Scotland, has been clear, we all need to work on resetting relationships. Indeed, the Prime Minister has already made this a priority, with his first official engagement being in Scotland with the First Minister, and this has been mirrored by early engagement by ministers throughout the UK Government, and that, I can assure you, will continue. For my part, I am clear that improved and ongoing cooperation will depend on three main things. Firstly, the sincerity of our collective commitment to a deep and durable resetting of relationships. Like the 1998 Act itself, collaborative working must endure beyond specific administrations and ministers and be about more than formal structures and machinery. Now, that doesn't always mean that we will agree, but we must be more mature about those disagreements, depolarising and detoxifying the tone of Scotland's debate. This should be the nature of grown-up politics, and it is what the people of Scotland, and indeed all four nations of the UK, rightly expect from us as their elected representatives. Secondly, we need a dynamic understanding of devolution as an ongoing process of redistributing power, something already evidenced in our commitment to Metro Mayors in England, further devolution within England as set out in the King's Speech, and in the establishment of the new Council of the Nations and Regions. And thirdly, we must commit to a genuine era of people power, with communities, cooperatives, civil society and local government working with government at all levels to deliver the change Scotland needs. Mr Deputy Speaker, as I hope my maiden speech made clear, I think we all need to have an open-hearted approach to working together in the best interests of the people we serve. And Mr Deputy Speaker, I will now turn to the substance of the debate today. I do appreciate that this is a deeply held concern by the Right Honourable Member for Goole and Pocklington. This government is focused on rebuilding trust in politics across the whole of the UK. In our manifesto, we have been clear that it is not only here in Westminster where more must be done to uphold the standards we expect to see in public life. Scrutiny of the Scottish Government is a matter for the Scottish Parliament, and is perhaps one that could be raised there by the Right Honourable Member's colleagues. Nevertheless, we have committed in our manifesto to ensuring that members of devolved legislatures will have the same free speech protections enjoyed by MPs here at Westminster, to better ensure that elected representatives can hold power to account. I hope the Right Honourable Member will welcome this commitment. It's important also to emphasise that legal proceedings between Mr Salmond and the Scottish Government are ongoing. Mr Deputy Speaker, I appreciate that there will be many views on how the Scotland Act 1998 might be improved. That is only right, and I'm sure we'll continue to hear those views both here and in the Scottish Parliament. But as I have said, the settlement has been remade over the course of 25 years on the basis of broad consensus. But delivery must now be our focus. As the King's Speech set out yesterday, this government is committed to delivering change for Scotland. From making Scotland the home of great British energy, central to our mission to make the UK a clean energy superpower, to the new National Wealth Fund and the New Deal for working people, we will deliver better outcomes for people in Scotland, particularly those on the sharp end of inequality, which holds too many people back. Mr Deputy Speaker, while it is true that cooperation between governments at political level has not always been straightforward, nevertheless, the Scotland Act has endured. And I have often said that while Scots do not have to agree about everything, we do have to find ways to agree about more. Mr Deputy Speaker, Labour is the party of devolution, and we will be a government of collaboration. But above all, we are going to deliver for the people of Scotland. There is so much to do. It's time to get started.
Yeah. The questions that this House do now adjourn, as many of their opinions say aye. Aye. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, order.